So how was dinner? Was that all right? Excellent. Are you ready just to go back to the hotel rooms now? Call it a night. Early start tomorrow. Everybody fine with that? Or have you got another 15, 20 minutes or so to hear somebody come and talk to you, maybe? Well, of course, our after-dinner speaker really doesn't need any introduction. Oh, is it not? Is it on? Is that working? That's on.
You don't need to come nearer.
It's fine. It's only me. You don't really need to hear me at all. Everybody okay? Yeah. Right, I'll just get on with it then. Ladies and 6 gentlemen. And well done for coming. Carole Boyd, everybody.
Wow. Now I've just got to arrange myself, excuse me. Good evening. It's a really great pleasure, can you hear me? Can you hear me? It's a really great pleasure to be part of this 4th annual convention of archers, academic archers. Thank you for inviting me. I have to say that I think it's quite extraordinary that you exist at all. I mean, are you really there? Because I feel unworthy to be standing in front of so erudite an audience. But then I started talking to one or two of you. And I realised that you're just as addicted as everybody else. So, in order to put myself into context for this evening, I'd like to think you might like to know that I'm a professional actress with a long career spanning over 40 years in theatre, radio, TV and a film. I've recorded some 300 audiobooks. I do commercial voiceovers, run drama workshops with students, perform with a words and music trio. I'm available for concerts, recitals, and I play most of the female characters in Postman Pat. Oh, thank you. Now I can tell you my story, my Postman Pat story. A few years ago, we were touring, some of the Archers cast were touring a play written for the Archers. And it was one-night stands all over the country. And we were playing Eastbourne one night, and the show was over, and there was a call to the stage door, and there was a very old friend from way, way back, drama school days. And she said, I can't believe it's you. All that was going on. And she said, I know I can't keep you for long, but we live here in Eastbourne, and I've got a 5-year-old son called Charles, who's crazy about Postman Pat. Now, this was the old Postman Pat, where there was a character called Miss Hubbard. Oh, yeah. And he was madly in love with Miss Hubbard. Will you phone, she said, and ask to speak to him as Miss Hubbard? So I said, yes, of course, and I'll invite you to lunch. So I phoned a couple of days later, and this little voice said, hello, Eastbourne 12345. So I said, hello, is that Charles? Yes. Hello, Charles. Miss Hubbard here. Hello, Miss Hubbard. Is Mummy there, Charles? Just a minute, Miss Hubbard. Mummy, Miss Hubbard's on the phone. So Mummy came to the phone. I invited them to lunch, and they arrived a week later. And there's Mummy and Daddy and Charles, aged 5, holding a big box of chocolates and a big luminous Postman Pat goods, merchandise sticker for Miss Hubbard's bike. So I looked him up and down, he looked me up and down, and clearly I didn't look anything like Miss Hubbard. So I said, hello, Charles. And he said, hello, Miss Hubbard. I felt I was forgiven because it was the voice. That's all he needed to hear. So they came in, he put his chocolates on the side, and we had lunch, and he kept saying, Miss Hubbard, excuse me, please would you pass the mashed potato? So I was passing the potato. Please would you pass this? Anyway, after a bit he said, Miss Hubbard, please may I speak to you in private? So I said, yes, of course, Charles. So we went next door and he was going from foot to foot like this. And I said, do you want to go to the loo, Charles? And he said, no, it's all right. It's just Miss Hubbard, please may I have one of your chocolates? So, of course, Mummy heard this. Charles, have you been asking for chocolate? Miss Hubbard said I could, it's all right. So that was Charles. Now he's Charlie Farley. I always call him Charlie Farley. And he's now 31. And he still calls me Miss Hubbard. So I thought you'd like to go ooh-ah, just as a prelude to everything else. But going back to me, I'm probably most known or even most notorious for my unfortunate connection with Mrs. Lynda Snell of Ambridge, home of BBC Radio 4's long-running soap opera, The Archers, as you know. Now, my dilemma in speaking to you tonight is that as someone who spends so much time working to create a world of fiction, how was I to find a nugget of pure truth and reality to share with you? Well, how does this sound? Ladies and gentlemen, I think I have found the answer to that question which for quite a few millennia has eluded even the greatest philosophers. The question, what is the meaning of life? Aristotle thought he knew. Einstein thought he knew better. But, ladies and gentlemen, pray be assured, I know better still. But before I enlighten you further on this cosmic theme, I need to engage you in a little market research, which I promise will only take a minute or two of your time and won't require you to reveal either your PIN, password, date of birth, or your mother's maiden name. You will remember my reference to Lynda Snell and the Archers. Now, as you'll discover, Mrs. Snell is never very far away. In fact, I spotted her just now at the bar helping herself to a large G&T. Well, she has insisted that before I continue, I must check you out first. She needs to ascertain whether you are of the right calibre, i.e., are you artistically aware, environmentally friendly, and politically correct? So, to avoid any unseemly behaviour when she does arrive, please bear with me while I just ask you a few simple questions. Remember, no money is at stake and don't even think about phoning a friend. 1. How many of you have heard of the Archers? 2. How many of you have ever listened to an episode? 3, finally, how many of you are hopelessly addicted and would admit to switching on not only the nightly episode, but the lunchtime repeat and even the Sunday omnibus, of course, while doing the ironing? As I thought. And what about those pushy listeners who demand that their friends record it for them because they happen to be on an architectural dig in the Philippines? Of course, there will be those among you, no doubt skulking under your seats by now, who have thus far managed to avoid the enticements of Ambridge and thus been spared the truth about Lynda Snell. So I feel it's only fair to bring you up to speed. Lynda and her long-suffering husband, the saintly Robert, arrived in Ambridge 33 years ago, having moved from the privileged oasis of leafy Sunningdale in Berkshire, chiefly to escape Lynda's bête noire and arch rival, the notoriously overweening Doreen Purifoy. Never heard of her? That's because she's one of those silent backstory characters unknown to listeners and part of Lynda's private paranoia. Unfortunately, Lynda has achieved similar notoriety by becoming, among other things, the bossiest woman in Ambridge, where she is perceived by the locals as a busy-bodying interloper. However, being the mistress of self-delusion, she perceives herself as, well, I can do no better than quote you her latest press release. In my pivotal position as receptionist at Grey Gables Country House Hotel, and with my many causes and projects designed to improve each shining hour of Ambridge inhabitants, I believe I have a multifaceted mission as cultural crusader, doyen of the arts, and bilingual beacon par excellence to open une fenêtre de l'opportunité. Thus relieving the encircling gloom of entrenched tradition and complacency which can be the scourge of country life. Needless to say, my endeavours frequently go unappreciated by the multitude, but 'twas ever thus, and I well know what it is to be misunderstood. After all, the strong have always been lonely. Well, I'm sure it all sounds hideously familiar. And why? Because we all know someone just like her, don't we? There are Lynda Snells in every street and byway up and down the country. In fact, there could be one sitting amongst us at this very moment. You see what we're dealing with. But I digress. Why on earth, I hear you cry, do you have anything to do with this ghastly woman? Well, let me explain. It wasn't my idea, ladies and gentlemen, I assure you. All I have is a vague memory of being summoned by the BBC in the mid-80s to audition for the part of a yuppie couple moving to Ambridge. The brief was, well, we don't really know what we want to do with them, but they're both heavily into conservation, yes. He's probably a dominant, thrusting computer whiz kid, etc. And she's a bit of a doormat. All BBC speak for, haven't a clue, better leave it to the actor. I was required to read a scene with Eddie Grundy, local lovable rogue, in which Lynda discovers him doing something disgusting to a small furry creature and gives him a dressing down. Oh, they said afterwards. Well, we'd like to offer you the part because you've made her unpleasant and we hadn't thought of that. And suddenly it all became clear to me. This was mid-80s Britain. We'd all become enthralled to TV soaps like Dallas and Dynasty. We're up to our eyes in power dressing and the outrageously Machiavellian exploits of J.R. Ewing and Alexis Carrington, the characters we loved to hate and who made for compulsive viewing. So, why not in Ambridge? Ladies and gentlemen, I knew what I had to do. Well, of course, this was radio. So outsized shoulder pads and big hair were academic. And I knew from experience that it would all depend on the voice and the listener's imagination. So I aimed for the most tooth-grindingly irritating voice I could muster. Loosely based, I have to say, on a former secretary of my husband's. Really nice woman with the infuriating habit of ringing up and saying, "Hello, it's me." Well, I reasoned, anyone who could go through life with a voice like that must be somewhat lacking in self-awareness. So I decided to create a monster. But it was only a few short weeks after I started playing Lynda Snell that I realised the monster was subtly infiltrating my psyche, like some insidious computer virus, worm, Trojan horse, or even spam. For example, I had a scene in the village shop with an actress I'd never met before who glared up at me from her 4'11" and hissed with rather unnecessary venom, I thought. Well, you're unfeasibly tall, aren't you? Without batting an eyelid, I fired back with, I suppose to a midget like you, I must be. Well, she gasped, ran from the studio in floods of tears, just as Jack May, alias Nelson Gabriel, wandered in, muttering, "Oh yes, I should think she's probably the tallest woman in the world." But I was horrified. What had I said? That wasn't really me. For one thing, I would never have the nerve to be so forthright to a fellow artiste, however rude. And anyway, I'm a nice person. What was happening? The fact that, as I later discovered, the rest of the cast were delighted that she'd finally got her comeuppance did nothing to reassure me. The next time I noticed the corrupting influence of Lynda Snell was when I was on the phone trying to get some sense out of BT Customer Services and came out with, "No, I'm sorry, telling me this is your first day in the job simply isn't good enough." And no, I won't bear with you or hang on while you get your supervisor. You call me back at your expense in 1 minute, or there'll be an immediate email to your chief executive, who happens to be a very good friend of mine. As I slammed the phone down, my husband was heard to mutter, "Darling, don't you think you're rather overdoing the Lynda Snell?" "I don't know what you mean," I growled, and chose to overlook this trite observation. But, ladies and gentlemen, it's got progressively worse in the last 33 years I've been associated with this woman. As the character grew more and more layers, she developed from interfering upstart to overweening, social climbing, self-styled expert on everything, from goat breeding, the environment, the performing arts, including the bard, as she insists on calling Shakespeare, to aromatherapy and Feng Shui, chronicler of Ambridge heritage and 5-star B&B landlady. She's acquired an irritating sniff. Which she employs to express disapproval, embarrassment, or merely plain resignation. Her self-delusion is boundless. She's even smug enough in her belief that she has almost perfect pitch. But her most significant trait is that, having no sense of humour, she's quite insensitive to people's reactions, until she might accidentally shoot herself in the foot and suffer a temporary downfall when everybody cheers. I think it probably wasn't until I started getting hate mail from her hometown. In fact, the Sunningdale Ladies Golf Club, accusing me of having given their town a bad name, that the whole Faustian experience really began to kick in. Imagine my horror when I found that my immediate reaction to this missive was, Sunningdale, eh? Oh no, it's my bête noire, that bitch Doreen Purifoy, up to her tricks. Well, where was that coming from? After all, Doreen Purifoy is merely a figment of Lynda Snell's imagined Sunningdale past. She doesn't really exist. Does she? Then a curious phenomenon gradually emerged, as Mrs. Snell's relentless campaigns against road widening or speed control or ploughing up rare wildflowers were seen to get results. She began attracting a different sort of response from people who actually admired her ability to get things done and were prepared to make the usual allowances for all her nonsense. In fact, were only too eager to get involved in the whole weird conspiracy. For example, there was the time when it looked as though Robert Snell's job might be relocating to Grimsby, a town well worthy of its name. While all Ambridge was secretly preparing to celebrate the imminent departure of Lynda Snell with fireworks, pig roast and gallons of Joe Grundy's apple brandy, Lynda was naturally putting on a brave face and planning a new campaign to bring the lost tradition of commedia dell'arte to the culturally disadvantaged fisherfolk of Humberside. Just at the peak of the will-he-won't-he-get-the-Grimsby job period of suspense, I was amazed to receive a letter from the Humberside American Wives Society, addressed to Mrs. Lynda Snell, as follows. Dear Mrs. Snell, as president of the Humberside American Wives Society, or HAWS, as we are loosely known, I want want you to know that if Robert gets that job in Grimsby, you can forget your worries and just get happy. Grimsby, a cultural desert? You've got to be kidding. Hell no. Among the many good things we at Oz have to offer are a range of exciting activities where you can put your formidable skills to work. How about you lead a French conversation session? No problem for a bilingual like you. Or maybe a drama workshop. We girls are keen to address Macbeth the method way. Or on a more homely note, we'd love to have you share with us your blueprint for the perfect village fete, specially adapted to our more urban Grimsby ambiance. Oh, what the hell. If Robert flunks the job, come join us anyway as an honorary member. We'd love to have you. Now, don't be a stranger, you hear? Next thing I know, I'm in Grimsby. I'm the guest of honour at the Hawes annual wine tasting. And find myself signing copies of Lynda Snell's latest book, Lynda Snell's Heritage of Ambridge, of which more later. I was feted in the all-American way and accosted by the real housewives of Grimsby, desperate to get their hands on Lynda's personal recipe for homemade elderflower pétillante to serve at an American midnight brunch on Christmas Eve. All very embarrassing, since my idea of midnight brunch stops at mince pies and wine mulled with the aid of a sachet from Sainsbury's. Then came Oak Apple Day, 1996, Lynda Snell's 50th birthday. I kept my head down, as you can imagine. But my husband informed me that we'd been invited to a barbecue in Reading. We don't know anyone in Reading, I cried. Aha, he retorted. I should have known. We'd just parked in a quiet street in Reading when the mobile phone rang and a female voice whispered, "Give it 10 minutes, then arrive and head for the garden." 10 breathless minutes later, I found myself an intruder in a large 30 semi with Mike's Place scrawled in red on the front door. I crept through the hall, made my way out to the garden, where a barbecue was in full swing, and several weird, nerdy-looking types were humming and swaying to the Archer's theme tune. Suddenly, I was accosted by a woman claiming to be Lynda Snell. She welcomed me to the patio, where she proceeded to interview me on the subject of being Lynda Snell. So there I was, ladies and gentlemen, myself, conversing with myself, but with absolutely no sign of Carole Boyd. So who was I, and where had I gone? It seemed my interviewer was chief executive of her own invention, the Lynda Snell Society. Members of this spooky sect are expected to hold a doctorate in the art of self-delusion. And I was privileged to be introduced to the most celebrated practitioners of this art, including the official piss artist. That is, poet in Snell Society artist. Well, obviously. This person, wearing outlandish bardic garments and claiming dubious Scottish literary descendancy, had actually won the nationwide competition to write a poem about Lynda Snell, which she has beseeched me to read you this evening. No, I'm sorry, but I feel I must share this acutely embarrassing moment with you, if only as an attempt to exorcise the postmodern extravaganza of that incredible afternoon. So please, bear with me, ladies and gentlemen, while I engage you in a little enforced catharsis. Here is, with apologies for that, towards that fine Scots poet, William McGonagall, the Ballad of Lynda Snell. Lynda, oh Lynda Snell, with voice as clear as St. Stephen's bell, come to our Barbie and wish us well, O fragrant nymph with a lovely smell. At yon grey gables works our Lynda, always to help, never to hinder. Nearby, Grace Archer was burned to a cinder when the stables blazed like a piece of timber. Lynda resides at Ambridge Hall, with Odin Yale silk on her bedroom wall. Her husband Robert had some gall when he pretended to catch the ball at the cricket match in front of all, but got his leg over during the fall. I finally escaped the unpleasantness of Reading. But as if that wasn't enough, for her next trick, Lynda Snell has actually managed to wangle a BBC commission to write her chef d'oeuvre, Lynda Snell's Heritage of Ambridge, in which she claimed to fill the need for an alternative guide to Ambridge, delving beneath the surface, going behind the scenes, under the carpets and down the backs of the sofas of this much-chronicled village. In a Borchester Echo front-page exclusive, it appeared that these revelations scandalised many Ambridge residents, resulting in ugly scenes in Underwood's department store at a book signing. Farmer Joe Grundy had to be forcibly escorted from the premises, and local rustic poet Bert Fry announced, "That's the last time I cooperate on a pantomime script with her." Here is a typical extract, a confrontation with Joe Grundy. "I'm afraid the Grundys are an inescapable factor of village life and must be given their due, but that didn't prevent a sinking feeling at the prospect of interviewing Joe Grundy, and with good reason. You see, I still have a vivid mental picture of the time when, while organising the entire village fete, virtually single-handed, I was cut off at the zenith of my powers by a spot of back trouble. Fortunately, on the actual day of the fete, I did manage to supervise the festivities from a litter. But it was during the hectic preparatory period, when I was issuing instructions from my bed of pain, that Joe Grundy walked into my bedroom, fresh from muck spreading. Appalled, I stopped him in his tracks with a well-projected cry of, "Joe, don't come one step nearer in those Wellingtons. Either take them off or stay by the door. I don't want mud all over the Wilton." Well, that was my first mistake. He grudgingly removed the Wellingtons and approached my bed in his socks. I don't remember much after that. Everything went hazy as the fumes from his feet filled the room with a murky miasma. I do have a vague memory of a bunch of flowers clutched in a grimy hand. I'm not saying he's totally bereft of social skills, though one wonders from whose garden they were wrenched. But their scent was completely nullified by the noxious gases emitting from those socks. From that day on, I vowed never again to set foot in a bedroom containing Joe Grundy. I do not intend to break that down. Can you imagine how I felt, ladies and gentlemen, when one December afternoon a few years ago, I answered the phone to actor Tom Baker, rambling on at great length about taking me, Lynda Snell, off in the TARDIS to meet the Daleks and practice the delights of Feng Shui in another world. I even found myself correcting his pronunciation in a Lynda Snell voice. "No, Tom, it's actually Feng Shui." When I later heard the whole conversation repeated on Radio 4's Dead Ringers, and realised that an actor had been impersonating Tom Baker and I'd been completely taken in, I had to go and lie down in a darkened room. Ladies and gentlemen, I know you will be shocked and grieved by my next disclosure, since it concerns the position of our much-respected monarch-in-waiting, HRH Prince Charles, a committed Archers fan, who graciously held the programme's 50th anniversary at St James's Palace. Well, of course, absolutely everybody was there. And during the presentation of the Archer family to HRH, the rest of the cast were, as usual, quietly getting drunk on royal champagne and BBC peanuts and crisps. As HRH swept past me and Mike Tucker, he suddenly stopped dead, did a double take, and approached me with a strange look on his face. You're Lynda Snell, aren't you? Well, I was so overwhelmed. Our future king presenting himself to me, rather than the other way round. But I rallied in the only way I knew. "Yes, I'm afraid I am, sir." He seemed amused, and we laughed and chatted about this and that, affairs of state, climate change, Camilla's taste in hats. And he reminded me how much I must miss Sunningdale. Ah, Sunningdale. So handy for the castle, I blurted out. He looked momentarily entertained, but eventually he drifted off to meet the hordes of celebrities awaiting him in the antechamber. But I could tell he was reluctant to tear himself away. I decided to overlook the whole disturbing incident, but only a year later, when I was attending a charity function at High Grove, he approached me again with the greeting, "Hello, we've met before, haven't we? How are the llamas?" I was appalled. Clearly, he was still under the impression that I was, well, somebody else. And when he insisted on addressing my husband as Robert, I knew all was lost. For almost 2 years, the nation was stunned by the high drama of Helen and Rob. Lynda Snell, while sympathising, provided some light relief by celebrating Ambridge's survival of the Great Flood and recklessly commissioned the Grundys to install a memorial stone and a shepherd's hut in her garden. Did Lynda fancy herself as Marie Antoinette, playing a pretend rural idyll at Versailles? Who knows? But my gardener, Dave of Shepperton, took the whole thing very seriously by announcing that a makeover was due. "That rubbishy bit down the bottom there." "Oh?" I said. "Yeah," he said. "I've seen a very nice second-hand caravan in exchange and marked. Bit of paint and a chimney. You could turn it into a shepherd's hut in no time." I looked him in the eye. "Who have you been talking to, Dave?" He merely gave a loud sniff and with a knowing smile exited meaningfully towards the compost heap. And so it goes on, ladies and gentlemen. I had my most recent psychic crunch with Lynda Snell only the other day. And it reminds me too of her recent folie de grandeur, her own reenactment and heavily revised translation of Chaucer's Canterbury Tales. She had resigned graciously from her key role of artistic director, designer and muse behind countless dramatic productions in order to pursue her dream of becoming the most well-read woman in Ambridge. She felt that great literature had somehow always eluded her, and in fact, much of it continued to do so as she grappled with the complexities of Cranford. The Hobbit she found irritating, and as for Moby Dick. Only when her quest led her back to the father of English literature did she discover the truth and humanity of Chaucer's great poetry. And yet, for Lynda, the call of Thespis cannot be ignored. So she merely rewrote Neville Coghill to her own taste, wrangled a cast, auditions by invitation only, nearly set fire to David Archer's barn, united the village and pulled off a major triumph. In a recent front row interview on Radio 4, she was asked what her next production might be. "Ah, who knows?" was her enigmatic reply. "I am thinking world theatre at the moment, of course. The Brothers Karamazov, starring Will and Ed Grundy. Possibly. And I do feel very drawn to Bertolt Brecht. Mother Courage, I think. With, yes, Jill Archer in the lead. And so it goes on. Ladies and gentlemen, these two elderly ladies I mentioned earlier approached me and plonked their shopping trolleys rather belligerently in my path. This was outside Cole Brothers, by the way. We eyed each other warily. I tried to smile, to no avail. Then one turned to the other and said, "You see, I was right, Mavis. It's that woman off EastEnders. What's her name? Barbara Windsor." Lynda Snell having the last laugh again, which brings me back to the question I posed earlier. What is the meaning of life? Well, I'm happy to say that by now I've come to realise that trying to keep a grip on reality is mere fantasy. So we don't need to worry about the meaning of life, ladies and gentlemen. The answer's very clear. Life is a soap opera.
shepherd's hut. Thank you, everybody. I think it's 10:10. That's right. I think retire to the bar, maybe. Thank you very much.